She was the dirt under their claws, the Omega they called worthless. Seraphina was rejected, humiliated, and cast out into a blizzard by the very Alpha who was supposed to protect her. They sent her out to die. But when she found a stranger, a dying black wolf, freezing in the snow, her pack's greatest sin became her destiny. She didn't know he was the king. She only knew he needed her. This is the story of how the weakest wolf in the pack saved the most powerful man in the world, and how 10 miles of ice and agony changed everything. The Shadowfang pack was built on strength, and Seraphina had none. She was an Omega, the lowest of the low, a rank that was less a position and more a sentence. At 21, her wolf, Luna, was barely larger than a timber wolf, a pale grey shadow in a pack of brutes. She had no family to speak for her. Her parents had vanished in a rogue attack when she was a child, leaving her as the pack's designated burden. Her days were a blur of servitude. She mended the torn clothes of warriors who sneered at her, scrubbed the great hall floor until her hands were raw, and ate only the scraps left after the lowest-ranking pack members had taken their fill. The architect of her misery was Alpha Marcus Vance. He was a brute of a man, wide-shouldered and iron-fisted, who ruled the Shadowfang territory in the remote mountains of Montana. He saw Seraphina's weakness as a personal insult, an imperfection in his otherwise dominant pack. His fated mate, Clara Jensen, was even worse. Clara, beautiful and cruel, used Seraphina as a target for her boredom, finding new ways each day to humiliate her. "Seraphina!" Clara's voice, sharp as broken glass, cut through the noise of the great hall. Seraphina, who had been trying to discreetly clear plates, flinched, dropping a silver fork. It clattered loudly on the stone floor. The hall went silent. Alpha Marcus looked up from his high table, his eyes flat and cold. "What is it now, Omega? Can you not even clear a table without demanding our attention?" I'm sorry, Alpha. It slipped," Seraphina murmured, her eyes fixed on the floor as she scrambled to pick it up. Clara let out a theatrical sigh. "She's just so clumsy, Marcus. Honestly, it's embarrassing. How can we be expected to host the Northern Conclave next month with her dropping things everywhere?" This was the opening they had been waiting for. The hunt this morning had been poor. A blizzard was rolling in from the north, thick and grey, promising to bury the territory for a week. The pack was restless and angry. They needed a target. Marcus stood, his massive frame silencing even the whispers. A poor hunt, a coming storm, and an Omega who cannot even carry a fork. It is a sign. He walked down from the platform, his heavy boots echoing. He stopped directly in front of Seraphina, forcing her to shrink back. "You are a drain, Seraphina," he snarled, his voice low enough for only her and the first few tables to hear, but his posture visible to all. "Your weakness leeches the strength from my pack. You are a bad omen." Tears pricked Seraphina's eyes, hot and humiliating. She willed them not to fall. "Don't show them they've won. You want to be useful?" Marcus grabbed her thin arm, his fingers biting into the bone. He dragged her to the heavy oak doors of the hall and threw them open. A wall of wind and fine, sharp snow blasted inside, making the fire pits hiss. The temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees in seconds. The blizzard had arrived. "The southern traps," Marcus commanded, his voice booming over the howl of the wind. "They haven't been checked in 2 days. Go. Do not return until you have reset everyone." It was a death sentence. The southern trap line was 10 miles long, winding through the most treacherous, wind-blasted ridges of their territory. No one would check those traps in this weather. It was a pointless errand designed for one purpose: to get rid of her. "Alpha, please." Seraphina whispered, terror finally breaking through her control. "The storm. I won't make it. The visibility is 0. "Then perhaps you will finally be of use to the pack," Clara said sweetly from her seat, feeding the carrion birds. Marcus shoved Seraphina out onto the stone steps. "Go. And if you return empty-handed, or before the storm breaks, do not bother returning at all." He slammed the doors. The heavy thud of the bar dropping into place echoed in her ears, louder than the screaming wind. Seraphina stood there for a long moment, the snow already melting on her thin tunic, chilling her to the bone. They had finally done it. They had cast her out. She had no coat, no supplies, only the threadbare clothes on her back and the small, trembling wolf inside her. Turning back was not an option. Staying meant freezing on the pack house steps. Her only choice was to walk. With a sob that was stolen by the wind, Seraphina pulled her arms around herself and stepped off the porch, disappearing into the white void. She was rejected, outcast, and walking to her death. She had no idea she was walking toward her destiny. The world dissolved into a howling whiteness. Seraphina had been walking for what felt like hours. The 10 miles of the trap line was an exaggeration. The start of the line was 3 miles away, up a steep ridge. The full line was 10. She knew she wouldn't even make it to the first trap. Her body was a constellation of pain. Her fingers were numb, her toes were blocks of ice, and the wind cut through her thin tunic like a serrated blade. Her own wolf, Luna, was whimpering in her mind, a small, frightened presence. "We must find shelter, little one. We must," Seraphina projected, though she held no real hope. She stumbled over a fallen log, buried by the snow, and fell hard, her face plunging into a deep drift. The snow was soft, insulating, and for a terrifying second she didn't want to get up. It would be so easy to close her eyes, to let the cold take her, to finally stop fighting. No, we will not give them the satisfaction of finding our body. Gritting her teeth, she pushed herself up. That's when she smelled it. Beneath the ozone-sharp scent of the blizzard, there was something else. It was metallic, coppery, and thick. Blood. And beneath that, the scent of a wolf, a stranger. Her first instinct was terror. Rogues were common in these mountains, desperate, lawless wolves cast out from their packs. A lone omega in a blizzard was an easy meal, but the scent was wrong. It wasn't just the feral musk of a rogue. This scent was richer. It smelled of ancient forests, of ozone, of something that felt like authority. And it was fading. Curiosity, a stupid, suicidal impulse, pulled her forward. She staggered through the trees, following the scent trail until she found its source. He was magnificent, and he was dying. He was a massive black wolf, easily twice her size, his fur so dark it seemed to drink the light from the snow-heavy sky. He was half buried in a drift, lying on his side. A dark, steaming stain was spreading out from his ribs, melting the snow around him. He was not from her pack. She knew every member of Shadowfang. This wolf was a stranger, an intruder. Pack law was absolute. Intruders were to be killed on sight, or if you were an Omega, reported to the warriors. She took a half step back, intending to circle around, to leave him to the storm. Then the wolf's head twitched. One eye, a startling deep amber, cracked open and found her. There was no malice in it, only exhaustion, agony, and a profound, shocking intelligence. He wasn't snarling. He wasn't threatening her. He was simply watching her. He huffed, a painful breath that misted in the air, and his eye slipped closed again. Seraphina stood frozen. Leave him. Leave him. It was the law. It was survival. Helping him would be treason. Alpha Marcus would kill her without a second thought. He's going to die anyway, she told herself. Just like me. She looked at the dying wolf, then back in the direction of the pack house she could no longer see. They had sent her out here to die. They had rejected her. They had barred the door. What allegiance did she owe a pack that wanted her dead? I'm not going to die out here, she whispered to the wind. And neither are you. She waded through the snow to his side. The wound was bad, worse than she'd thought. It wasn't a claw mark or a bite. It was a deep puncture, black around the edges, and it smelled wrong. It smelled of silver and something herbal, something that made her wolf recoil. Wolf's bane. This wasn't a fight. It was an assassination. Who did this to you? She murmured, her numb fingers hovering over the wound. The wolf let out a low whine. He was fading fast. She couldn't shift and drag him. Her wolf was too small, and she needed her human hands. He was too weak to shift, even if he could. She couldn't carry him. He was at least 200 pounds of dead weight. But she couldn't leave him. She looked around frantically. Her eyes landed on 2 strong, straight saplings nearby. She had reset traps before. She knew how to make a snare. She could make a travois. With her hands already stiff and clumsy from the cold, Seraphina set to work. She snapped off smaller branches, using the rough edges of a stone to cut through the bark. She tore strips from the hem of her own tunic, the only rope she had. It was a pathetic, flimsy creation, but it would have to be enough. It took her nearly an hour in which the wolf's breathing grew shallower. When she was done, she faced the hardest part. She put her shoulders against his uninjured side and pushed, grunting with an exertion that tore at her frozen muscles. She rolled him onto the makeshift sled. He groaned, a deep, rattling sound, but didn't wake. She looped the thickest branch ends over her shoulders, creating a crude harness. She took a deep breath, the air so cold it burned her lungs. Okay, she panted, leaning forward, putting all her 120 pounds of body weight into the pull. Okay, we're going. The travois scraped against the snow, then moved, an inch, then a foot. Seraphina locked her eyes on the grey horizon and began to walk, dragging the dying stranger behind her. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay. She was a rejected Omega, saving a wolf she should have left to die. The blizzard raged, and the 10-mile journey began. The journey was a special kind of hell. The 10-mile number was a black joke. Seraphina had no destination. She was just moving, putting one frozen foot in front of the other, her world reduced to the white blur in front of her and the agonizing weight behind her. The travois was a miserable failure. The branches snagged on hidden roots and rocks, and the strips of her tunic snapped one by one. Twice, the entire sled overturned, spilling the black wolf into the snow. The second time it happened, Seraphina fell to her knees, the harness branches digging into her raw shoulders, and she wept. "I can't," she gasped, her tears freezing on her cheeks. "I can't do this. You're too heavy." The wolf, barely conscious, whined. It was a sound of pure misery. "Get up." The voice was her own, but it felt new. It was hard, stripped of its usual fear. "Get up, or you both die here. Give Clara the satisfaction. Get up." Rage, cold and sharp, cut through her despair. She got up. She abandoned the travois. She had to drag him. She wrapped her arms under his forelegs, locked her hands over his chest, and pulled. She walked backward, step by agonizing step, using the power of the blizzard to hide her tracks. It was slower. It was agony. But she was moving. She estimated she was 5 or 6 miles from the pack house, deep in the uncharted southern woods where no patrols ever bothered to go. The blizzard was a blessing and a curse. It was killing her. but it was also hiding her. After what felt like a full day, as the grey light began to dim into an even darker, more ominous twilight, she found it. A cleft in a rock face, hidden behind a curtain of ancient, snow-laden pines. It was a fox den, or perhaps an old wolf den, long abandoned. It was shallow, barely high enough for her to crouch in, but it was out of the wind. It was shelter. With the last of her strength, she hauled the black wolf into the narrow opening. He was a dead weight now, his breathing terrifyingly shallow. She collapsed next to him, her body shaking so violently she thought she might break. But she couldn't rest. "Fire," she muttered, her teeth chattering. "We need fire." Her hands were claws, useless and white with frostbite. She rubbed them frantically against her jeans, screaming in frustration and pain as the feeling, pins and needles, returned. She fumbled in her pocket for the small survival kit she always carried, a habit beaten into her by 1,000 pointless errands. A small flint, a steel, and a waterproof tube of dried moss. She gathered bark and dry twigs from the very back of the small cave. It took her 20 minutes to get a spark, her hands shaking too badly to strike the flint. Finally, a spark caught. She blew on the tinder, her breath weak, until a tiny, precious flame licked to life. She fed it twigs, then larger branches, until a small, smoky fire crackled between her and the cave entrance. It was a beacon, a terrible risk, but without it, they would freeze before morning. The warmth was the most intense pleasure she had ever known. She turned her attention to the wolf. In the flickering light, his fur was matted with frozen blood. She used the last of her strength to shift, her bones cracking and reforming. Her small grey wolf, Luna, emerged, shivering. Luna was weak, but she had a wolf's tongue and a wolf's endurance. She lay beside the great black wolf, pressing her small body against his, sharing her meager warmth. She began to lick the wound, cleaning the silver and wolfsbane from his fur. The poison tasted like ash and death. He whimpered, but his breathing seemed to steady, just a fraction. Seraphina stayed in her wolf form, a tiny guardian for a fallen giant. She was an Omega, a reject, hidden in a blizzard, protecting a stranger who should have been her enemy. She had survived the 10-mile journey. Now, she just had to survive the night. While Seraphina fought for her life in the blizzard, Alpha Marcus Vance was fighting to control his panic. He stood by the Great Hall's fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his knuckles white. The Royal Guard had arrived an hour ago. Not a diplomatic visit. This was a search party. They had burst in, 5 of them, their black and silver uniforms stark against the rustic wood of his hall. They were led by a man named Commander Gideon, whose scarred face and dead eyes promised violence. "Alpha Marcus," Gideon had said, his voice a low rumble. "We are tracking a priority target. His trail went cold 20 miles north of your border. We have reason to believe he may have crossed onto your lands." Marcus had forced a look of polite concern. "A priority target, Commander? A rogue? We have had no such sightings." Gideon stared at him, unblinking. "We are searching for Alpha King Elias Thorne." The name hit the room like a physical blow. The Alpha King, the ruler of all packs in the Northern American territory. "Here?" Clara, from her seat, gasped. "The king?" "Here." His Majesty was on a private tour of the northern border territories, Gideon said, his eyes scanning the room, assessing every warrior. His escort was ambushed. We believe it was an inside job, aided by local traitors. Marcus felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. "Traitors? In my territory? Impossible." "We will be the judge of that," Gideon said. "My men will require quarters, and we will be searching your lands, with or without your permission." Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. Of course, Commander. My pack is at your disposal. We will find our king. As Gideon and his men were shown to the guest wing, Marcus grabbed his beta, James Foreman, by the arm and dragged him into his private study. "You idiot!" Marcus hissed, slamming the door. "You said the poison was clean." James, a lanky, nervous man, recoiled. It was Alpha. Silver nitrate and concentrated wolfsbane. A pinprick is enough to stop a heart, let alone the dose we put on that arrow. He should be dead. The ambush team confirmed he was hit. "He's not dead!" Marcus slammed his fist on his desk. "He's out there, in that blizzard, and his personal guard is here. If they find him, if he talks—" "He won't talk," James said, a little too quickly. "He'll freeze. That poison, it stops the healing. It forces the shift. He's trapped in his wolf form, wounded, in the middle of a blizzard. No one can survive that. We're in the clear. The storm is our alibi." Marcus paced the room, his mind racing. He had made a deal with Viscount Valerius, a rival to the king's throne. Valerius had promised Marcus full control of the entire Montana territory if he helped remove the king during his tour. It had been so simple, a hunting accident. But now— "Loose ends," Marcus muttered. "There's a loose end." James looked confused. "What? The ambush team is gone, back to Valerius. My patrol found the king's dead escort. We're clean." "The Omega!" Marcus snarled, grabbing James by the collar. "Seraphina, I sent her out, to the southern trap lines." "Her?" James laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "She'll be a block of ice by now, Alpha. She's not a problem." "She's a witness," Marcus corrected him, his eyes wild. "The southern line passes near the ambush site. What if she saw something? What if she finds him? That pathetic, bleeding heart. She'd try to help." The thought of his entire plan being ruined by the one person he considered less than dirt was too much. "Get your patrol," Marcus ordered, his voice deadly calm. "Go find her. Use the search for the king as your excuse. Tell Gideon you're helping. Find her, James. And if she's not alone, you silence them both. Make sure the blizzard buries the evidence." James swallowed, his bravado gone. And if we find the king?" "Then you finish the job you were paid to do," Marcus said, turning to look out the window at the white, swirling abyss. "And you make damn sure that Omega never speaks again." Warmth. That was the first thing his shattered senses registered. Warmth and the smell of wood smoke. The second was the pain. It was a living thing, a fire that burned from his ribs and spread through every vein, leaving him weak and human. He opened his eyes. He was in a small cave. A tiny fire crackled near the mouth, its smoke cleverly drawn up through a fissure in the rock. He was on a bed of pine boughs, covered in a thin, worn tunic. And he was not alone. Curled at his feet, in the shape of a small grey wolf, was his savior. He remembered flashes, the ambush, the searing pain in his side, his wolf, Lycaon, forcing the shift as a desperate defense, only for the poison to trap him there, stumbling through the snow, bleeding out, knowing he was dying. And then a scent. Pine and old books and fear. A girl. He remembered her dragging him. He remembered the cold. He remembered this cave. He tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea and agony slammed him back down. "Careful," a soft voice said. The small wolf at his feet stirred, lifted its head, and in a shimmer of movement, it was gone. In its place sat the girl from his memory. She was young, maybe 21, and painfully thin. Her grey tunic was torn, her hands were wrapped in bloody rags, and her face was gaunt with exhaustion and frostbite. But her eyes were a clear, startling blue, and they held no fear, only concern. Who are you? He rascalped, his throat raw. My name is Seraphina. I'm from the Shadowfang pack. She gestured vaguely. You're safe, for now. The blizzard is covering us. He pushed himself up on one elbow, gritting his teeth. He was human again. The shift must have happened while he slept, a sign that the poison was finally wearing off. He looked down. His wound was still there, a blackened, angry puncture, but it was closed. It was healing. She had cleaned it. She had kept him warm. She had saved his life. They sent you out in this? He asked, his voice rough with authority he couldn't quite hide. She flinched, looking down at her hands. I'm the Pack Omega. I was sent to check the traps. He knew what that meant. It was an execution. You should have left me, he said, not unkindly. I'm an outsider. Helping me. They will kill you for this. They were going to kill me anyway, she said with a bleak simplicity. At least this way I did something. Your bleeding stopped, but you were so cold. I had to start the fire. She looked worried. I hope they can't smell the smoke. They won't. The wind is too strong. He studied her. She was starving, frostbitten, and had given him her own tunic as a blanket. This Omega, this eject, possessed more courage than half his royal guard. What is your name? She asked. He hesitated. Elias. Elias, she repeated. You need to rest, Elias. Your wound. It's not a normal one. I am aware. He shifted, trying to find a position that didn't set his nerves on fire. As he moved, the small cave filled with his scent, and Seraphina's world tilted on its axis. Her wolf, Luna, who had been silent and dormant, suddenly rose up in her mind, screaming a single, impossible word. Mate. The scent hit her like a physical blow. It was the same scent she'd smelled on the black wolf, but now it was 1,000 times stronger, unfiltered by his injury. It was the smell of ozone and pine, and a power that called to the very core of her being. Elias went rigid. He stared at her, his amber eyes widening in disbelief. He had been so focused on the pain, the betrayal, that he hadn't noticed. Now he did. The air in the cave crackled. Her scent, the one he'd registered as pine and fear, now resolved itself into the most intoxicating aroma he had ever known. It was the other half of his soul. No, Seraphina whispered, shaking her head, backing away until she hit the cold stone wall. No, that's not possible. I'm an Omega. You're an Alpha, a strong one. It's possible, Elias said, his voice a low growl that vibrated in her bones. He was stunned. The fates had a cruel sense of humor, to send him his mate in his weakest moment, in the form of a girl who was herself on the brink of death. Mate, he breathed. The word was a vow. Before Seraphina could process the impossible, a new sound cut through the howl of the wind, shouting and the scent of pack. Seraphina's blood ran cold. No. Oh no. She scrambled to the cave mouth and peered through the curtain of pine. Through the swirling snow she saw them. 4 wolves, in their shifted form, tracking through the snow, and leading them, in his human form, was James Foreman, Alpha Marcus's beta. They weren't a rescue party. They were a hunting party, and they were heading straight for the smoke. They've found us, she whispered, pure terror gripping her. James, he's Alpha Marcus's beta. They're here to kill us. Elias was already on his feet, ignoring the fire in his ribs. He was weak, human, and unarmed, but he was a king. Get behind me, Seraphina, he commanded. Elias, you can't, she cried. You're injured. They'll tear you apart. They can try. The figures grew closer. James stopped, sniffing the air, and pointed directly at their hiding spot. "There, the smoke! Flush them out!" The 4 wolves bounded forward, snarling, their claws tearing at the snow. Seraphina grabbed a thick, burning branch from the fire, the only weapon she had. Elias shoved her behind him, just as the first wolf, a huge grey brute, burst into the cave. The cave exploded into violence. The first wolf lunged for Elias. Even injured, the king's reflexes were supernatural. He sidestepped, grabbing the wolf by the scruff and slamming its head into the stone wall with a sickening crack. It fell, stunned. A second wolf barreled in, claws extended. Elias met it head-on, but his injured side screamed in protest. The wolf's claws raked his chest, sending him staggering back. "Elias!" Seraphina screamed. James Foreman appeared at the cave mouth, his face a mask of shocked fury. He hadn't expected the stranger to be human. He'd expected to find Seraphina huddled over a half-dead wolf. "Kill him!" James roared at his warriors. "Kill them both!" The third and fourth wolves, seeing their target was human, shimmered and shifted, their bones snapping as they reverted to their bipedal forms. They were now 2 large, muscular warriors against 1 injured man and a terrified Omega. "Omega!" James sneered, pulling a long, silver-edged knife from his belt. "You should have died in the snow. Alpha Marcus is going to be so disappointed I have to get blood on his territory." He lunged, not at Elias, but at Seraphina. Elias roared. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of a king, a primal claim of possession and fury. He launched himself through the second wolf, tackling James to the ground. The force of the impact sent them both skidding out of the cave and into the snow. Inside the cave, Seraphina was left with the 2 warriors. They advanced on her, their eyes promising a painful end. "Pathetic!" One of them, a man named Thomas, spat. "Saving a rogue! You've dishonored us all!" Seraphina was shaking, but the burning branch was still in her hand. "He's not a rogue," she said, her voice small but fierce. "He's about to be a corpse." As Thomas lunged, Seraphina did the only thing she could. She thrust the burning end of the branch forward, straight into his face. He shrieked, stumbling back, clutching his eyes. The other warrior, stunned by her audacity, hesitated. That second was all she needed. Seraphina, driven by an adrenaline she'd never known, grabbed a heavy rock from the cave floor and brought it down on the back of his head. He crumpled. Outside, the fight was more brutal. Elias was a master combatant, but James was desperate, and Elias was bleeding freely. James had the silver knife and aimed for the original wound, trying to reopen it. "You should have died, Your Majesty," James panted, straddling Elias's chest, the knife raised for a final, killing blow. "Viscount Valerius sends his regards." Elias caught his wrist, his muscles straining. The silver burned his skin. The blade inched closer to his throat. "James," a new voice bellowed, shaking the very trees. "Stand down! By order of the king!" James froze. Through the blizzard, 5 figures emerged, clad in the black and silver of the Royal Guard. Commander Gideon was in the lead, his sword drawn. James's face went white with terror. He had been so focused on the fight, he hadn't heard their approach. "Treason," Gideon stated, his voice flat. He kicked James in the ribs, sending him sprawling off Elias. In seconds, the Royal Guard had James pinned, his arms bound, the silver knife kicked away. Gideon rushed to Elias's side, helping his king to his feet. "Your Majesty, you are wounded." "I will live," Elias grunted, clutching his side. He looked at the cave, his expression desperate. Seraphina stumbled out of the cave, covered in soot and blood, but walking. The relief that washed over Elias's face was so profound it stole her breath. He ignored his commander, ignored his wounds, and strode to her. He put his hands on her arms, his amber eyes searching hers. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered, her legs threatening to give out. I don't think so. The others, in the cave." Gideon and his men secured the other 3 traitors, dragging them, bound and wounded, from the den. James, seeing his life was over, started screaming. It was Marcus! It was Alpha Marcus! He made the deal with Valerius! He poisoned the king! He sent me to kill them! It was all him! Elias looked at James, his eyes turning to chips of ice. "Gideon, take this. Filth, and his men. We are returning to the Shadowfang Lodge. It seems I have a pack to cleanse." He turned back to Seraphina. He was the king. He was covered in blood, swaying on his feet. Yet he was the most powerful thing she had ever seen. Gently, as if she were made of glass, he pulled off his own ruined cloak and wrapped it around her, pulling her against his uninjured side. "You're safe now, my brave mate," he murmured. "Let's go home." The command, "Let's go home," hung in the frozen air. It was a word that held no meaning for Seraphina. Home had been the place of her torment, a collection of stone walls that offered no warmth, no safety. The journey back was a grim procession, a staggering march against a wind that seemed furious at their survival. Elias was a towering inferno of pain and purpose. He had accepted Commander Gideon's support, his left arm draped over the soldier's shoulder, but his right arm was a band of steel around Seraphina's waist, pulling her flush against his uninjured side. He used his own body as a shield against the blizzard, tucking her head under his chin. He was a furnace, and despite the blood and the cold, she had never felt so warm. The Royal Guard formed a protective diamond around them. The traitors, James Foreman, and the 3 pack warriors were dragged behind, bound with silver-laced cuffs that sizzled against their skin, their whimpers of pain and terror stolen by the wind. Seraphina walked in a daze. The world had tilted. The man holding her, the man whose scent was now inextricably woven into her own, was the king, the alpha of all alphas. And he had looked at her, with her frost-bitten hands and torn tunic, and called her mate. The bond thrummed between them, a low, vibrating hum beneath her ribs. It was a bizarre and terrifying comfort. It felt like a lifeline in an ocean of impossible revelations. "You are shaking," Elias's voice rumbled, his chest vibrating against her ear. It was not a question. I'm cold," she whispered. A half-truth. He paused, his entire procession halting. The guard stopped, their faces impassive. Elias looked down at her, his amber eyes searching hers in the swirling snow. "I will not let you be cold again." He pulled the ruined, blood-soaked cloak tighter around her, his fingers brushing the frozen skin of her neck. The simple touch sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with fear. "This will be over soon, Seraphina, I promise you." She had to ask. The words tumbled out, hoarse and small. What he said, "James, about Viscount Valerius. It's true?" Elias's jaw tightened, his profile hardening into granite. "Valerius is a snake. I should have beheaded a year ago. He covets my throne. He saw my tour of the Northern Territories as an opportunity. And your alpha," he spat the word like poison, "was his greedy, idiotic pawn." He looked ahead, his eyes fixed on the faint, distant glow of the pack house. "Marcus Vance sold his king for a few more acres of land. He is a fool, and he will die as one." The finality of it chilled her more than the blizzard. This was the world of alphas, of kings and politics, a world of blood and betrayal she had only glimpsed from the scullery. Now, she was at its very center. As the tree line broke, the pack house loomed before them. The great hall was lit, its windows a defiant, warm yellow against the screaming white of the storm. For Seraphina, it was the mouth of the beast, her legs locked. This was the place she had been cast from. This was the building where every hand had been raised against her, where her name was a synonym for worthless. She couldn't go back in. Elias felt her falter. He stopped the procession again, just yards from the heavy oak doors. He gently gripped her chin, ignoring his commander's impatient presence, and forced her to meet his gaze. "Seraphina," he said, his voice low and intense, cutting through the wind. "Look at me." She did, her wide, terrified blue eyes locking with his fierce amber. "You are not walking in there as their Omega," he commanded, not asked. "You are not their scapegoat. You are not their servant. You are walking in there as my Luna. You are my fated, and you are my queen. They will not touch you. They will not speak to you. They will not even look at you without my permission. The next person who raises a hand to you will lose it. Do you understand me?" She couldn't find her voice. She was the girl who reset traps, who scrubbed floors, who ate scraps. But the man in front of her, he was a king, and he saw her. She gave a single, shaky nod. "Good." His expression softened for a fraction of a second. "Hold your head high. You have earned it more than anyone in that hall." He released her chin and nodded to Gideon. "Open the doors. Let us see this traitor's face when he greets his king." The great hall of the Shadowfang pack was loud, not with celebration, but with restless, nervous energy. The blizzard had cooped up over 100 wolves, and the failed hunt had left them surly. Alpha Marcus Vance sat at the high table, a near-empty bottle of whiskey at his elbow, his face flushed. Clara sat beside him, filing her nails, her expression one of profound boredom and irritation. Crash! The heavy oak doors were thrown open with such force they slammed against the interior stone walls. The sound was a thunderclap that silenced the hall in an instant. Every head snapped to the entrance. 2 of the Royal Guard entered first, their black and silver uniforms stark and foreign, their weapons drawn. They moved with lethal efficiency, fanning out to secure the room, their dead eyes scanning the pack members, who froze, cups halfway to their lips. A path was cleared. And then he entered. Alpha King Elias Thorne. The pack collectively gasped. He was a terrifying sight, bare-chested, his body a canvas of muscle, sweat, and blood. A fresh, makeshift bandage was wrapped around his ribs, but the crimson was already seaming through. He was being supported by Commander Gideon, but he walked on his own feet, his chin high, his power rolling off him in suffocating waves. He was the apex predator, and he had just walked into a den of lesser wolves. And at his side, tucked under his arm, held against him as a precious, non-negotiable possession, was Seraphina. The pack stared, their minds unable to process the scene. They saw their king, wounded but alive, and they saw their Omega, who was supposed to be dead in the snow, wrapped in the king's cloak, held by the king's arm. Marcus Vance shot to his feet, his heavy wooden chair crashing to the floor behind him. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, terrified grey. "Your Majesty!" he boomed, his voice a false, hearty attempt to cover his shock. "You are alive. Thank the fates. We have been searching for you. My men are out in this very storm, scouring the territory." Clara's reaction was different. Her eyes bypassed the king and locked directly onto Seraphina. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows rose in disbelief, which instantly twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You!" she hissed, her voice cutting through her mate's bluster, forgetting her audience entirely. "What is that doing here? I thought you were—" "That?" Elias's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold as the silver on his guard's blades, is a question you are no longer qualified to ask, Lady Clara. He didn't stop walking. With Seraphina held firmly at his side, he advanced, his heavy boots echoing on the stone. He didn't stop at the foot of the dais. He walked right up the steps, forcing Marcus and Clara to backpedal until he was standing in the Alpha's spot, looking down on the hall that had rejected his mate. Alpha Marcus, Elias's voice was dangerously, deceptively calm. You have played a very foolish game. I don't understand, Your Majesty, Marcus stammered, holding his hands up in a gesture of placation. We are your loyal servants. My beta, James Foreman, he took a patrol to the southern ridge, looking for you. He found me, Elias agreed, a cruel smile touching his lips. He was very helpful. He nodded to Gideon. The commander barked an order. The main doors opened again. The two guards dragged in the 4 traitors. James, Thomas, Gregory, and Alistair were thrown, bound and soaking, onto the floor at the foot of the dais. They landed in a pathetic, whimpering heap at Marcus's feet. James, Elias continued, has been very forthcoming. He stepped down from the dais, walked to the cowering beta, and ripped the gag from his mouth himself. He has confessed. James Foreman was hysterical, tears and snot freezing on his face. He made me do it, he shrieked, pointing a trembling, bound hand at Marcus. It was him. It was all Alpha Marcus. He made the deal with Viscount Valerius. He said the king was weak, that Valerius would reward us. He poisoned the arrow. He gave me the silver knife. He sent me to kill them both, to clean up the Omega problem and finish the king. Please, Your Majesty, I was just following orders. The Pack's collective horror was a palpable thing. This was not just murder. This was high treason. Lies! Marcus roared, his face purpling. All of it. You can't believe the word of a snivelling coward. He's lying to save his own skin. He is, Elias agreed pleasantly, his voice conversational, as he began to circle the high table. But the proof is not just in his words. He gestured to the bloody bandage on his own ribs. This poison is a very specific blend of silver nitrate and concentrated wolfsbane, one favored by Viscount Valerius's personal apothecary. He stopped, picking up the silver knife the guards had taken from James. And this knife, which your beta tried to plant in my heart, bears the Shadowfang forge mark. A bit clumsy, Marcus. You're getting sloppy. He stopped directly behind Clara, his voice dropping to a predator's growl. And then, there is the matter of motive. Why send a loyal beta to kill your king? Unless you had already tried and failed, and needed to silence the only witness. He moved to stand beside Seraphina again, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. He wasn't sent to find me. He was sent to find her, because you, Marcus, in your arrogance, sent her to the exact location of your ambush. You sent this Omega to her death, believing she would freeze before she ever reached the first trap. A perfect, clean disposal. Elias leaned in, his face inches from Marcus's. You just didn't count on her surviving. You didn't count on her strength. And you certainly, his voice dropped to a whisper, didn't count on her saving my life. Clara had been shaking, her world dissolving. But the sight of Seraphina, the object of her daily scorn, being lauded as a hero, it was too much. Her vanity and cruelty shattered her fear. She's lying, Clara shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical screech. That pathetic, manipulative bitch! She's a worthless, rankless Omega. She probably led you into the trap herself. She's a whore trying to sleep her way to a rank she will never, ever earn. She's nothing. The hall went dead silent. The only sound was the wind. Seraphina flinched as if Clara had struck her, every cruel word a physical blow. Elias did not move for a full 5 seconds. He just looked at Clara, his expression utterly blank. When he finally spoke, the temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees. "She is my fated mate." The words were an atom bomb. Marcus stumbled back, his hand clutching his heart, as if Elias had physically stabbed him. Clara's face contorted into a mask of grotesque disbelief, jealousy, and pure, undiluted horror. "No," she whispered, her painted lips trembling. "No, that's impossible. The Fates, they wouldn't—" "Her? The Fates are wiser than you," Elias said coldly. He turned his burning gaze back to Marcus. "You have heard the confession. You see the proof. You have witnessed the betrayal. Marcus Vance, James Foreman, Thomas, Gregory, and Alistair are found guilty of high treason against the crown and the attempted murder of their future queen." His voice rang with the finality of a death knell. "The sentence is death. Immediately." "No!" Marcus roared, a desperate animal sound, and finally tried to shift. But he was too slow, too drunk, too terrified. Before his bones could even begin to crack, Gideon was on him. A heavy, silver-laced chain was thrown around his neck, and he was hauled to his knees, choking, his eyes bulging. "Take them outside," Elias commanded. "Let the blizzard be the last thing they feel." The royal guard was efficient. They dragged the 5 men, Marcus now limp, the others weeping and begging, out of the hall and into the storm. The pack listened in horrified silence. There were no long, drawn-out screams, just the swift, wet, final sounds of justice being served. Elias turned to the last remaining traitor, Clara. She had sunk into her chair, a whimpering, broken doll. "As for you, Lady Clara," Elias said, his voice void of all emotion, "you did not plot my death, but you aided in the humiliation and attempted murder of your queen. You are stripped of your rank. You are stripped of your name. You are stripped of your pack. You will be taken to the royal dungeons and await my further judgment. You always enjoyed seeing others on their knees. You will spend the rest of your miserable life scrubbing floors. We'll see how you enjoy the view." 2 guards hauled her to her feet. "No, please, no! Seraphina, tell him! Tell him I didn't mean it! Please!" Seraphina, who had watched her tormentor's life unravel, said nothing. She just watched as the woman who had made her life hell was dragged away, her pleas fading down the hall. Silence. A heavy, terrified silence descended. Aloysius, wounded and bleeding, stood with Seraphina in a hall full of shocked, leaderless wolves. He turned to them, his fury receding, replaced by the cold, clear authority of a king. "Your alpha is gone," he announced, his voice filling the hall. "Your pack, as you knew it, is broken by his treachery. From this day, the Shadowfang pack is dissolved. This territory and all its members are now absorbed into the royal territory, under my direct and immediate rule." He gently pulled Seraphina from behind him and stood her in front of him, his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to face the people who had tormented her. She was shaking from head to toe, but she did not drop her gaze. "You will not be without a leader," he said, his voice softening just enough for the first few rows to hear. "You will answer to her." He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb, his gaze full of a fierce, possessive pride. "This woman, whom you called Omega, whom you scorned and beat and starved, this woman carried your king 10 miles through a blizzard with a poisoned wound in his side. She made fire from nothing. She guarded him with her life. She faced down 4 of your strongest warriors, armed with nothing but a burning branch and a rock to protect him. She has the heart of a wolf and the courage of a queen. He turned her to face him, his amber eyes blazing with a fire that was no longer anger, but a new, brilliant, consuming adoration. "Seraphina of Shadowfang, my fated mate, my Anam Cara," he said, his voice ringing with power. "I claim you, here and now, before all Pax and under the eye of the moon goddess herself." He lifted her chin, tilting her face up to his. "You are no longer rejected. You are no longer outcast. You are no longer Omega." He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a claiming. It was a brand. It was a promise of protection and a vow of possession. It sent a jolt of pure, golden energy through Seraphina, a warmth that traveled from her lips to her toes, healing the frostbite on her soul and chasing out the last shadows of her old life. The pack, watching, gasped as a faint, golden aura. The visible light of a formal mate bond shimmered around the pair for a split second. When he finally broke the kiss, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice for her ears only. "You are safe, my heart. I have you." Then he turned them both to face the pack, his arm a band of steel around her waist. An unmovable, undeniable support, Seraphina stood, not as an Omega, but as a survivor. As his. "You will kneel," Elias commanded. One by one, like stalks of wheat in a field, the wolves of the former Shadowfang pack dropped to one knee. "You will show your new Luna the respect she has earned," he declared. "You will greet your queen." And so, Seraphina's life began. She went from the floor of the pack house to the throne of the territories. The hands that were raw from scrubbing floors were now adorned as the Luna Queen. Her story teaches us that true strength isn't about your rank, your power, or what others call you. It's about the choices you make when you have nothing left to lose. It's about the courage to show kindness, even to a stranger, and the resilience to survive the storm. They called her worthless, but the king called her his mate. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you felt that surge of justice and that warmth of fated love, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and subscribe to the channel for more stories where the underestimated find their true destiny. We'll see you in the